Welcome back, everyone. Today we've got the next step in my quest, I suppose, to disassemble everything and anything Mikrotik, and that is this elongated black rectangle that is the RB3011. So a little background. This is actually the second Mikrotik device I ever got my hands on, is the RB3011. The first was a CRS328. And this thing is probably not something I would purchase today. I'd look to its newer evolution, the 4011. But it's still a pretty capable device. So the RB3011 was Mikrotik's first ARM device. And this has got a dual-core 1.4 gigahertz CPU, a gig of RAM, and ships with router OS level 5, as well as a full 10-port complement of gigabit ports, one of which is PoE in, one of which is PoE out. So you can do a couple of different things with the PoE in and out. I already talked about the RB260GS, which is a PoE in device. The HAP AC is another one that'll take PoE in, so you could pair this with one of those for, you run LAN on this, you run wireless on that, and realistically, this is a pretty capable device. Now, I mentioned I wouldn't buy one today. We've got it on here because I actually took this one out of service. At this point, it's been in service for about 4 years, and it got upgraded with a bigger one. COVID called for more VPN. The health crisis called for more VPN capabilities than the little dual-core ARM CPU in here could handle. It got replaced with a larger CCR1016 unit. We actually saw that CCR1016 get disassembled, and there'll be a link to it in the description below. But I thought this would be a good one to have for a little bit of context and a little bit of background. Now, the other side of that coin is this has been supplanted by the RB4011, which adds a 10 gigabit port and has a wireless option built in. You can get those for about $100 more than this one. So this is about $120 to $160, depending on where it is. And I've seen them used for about $100 on eBay, maybe a little less. 4011s are just a bit under $200 to about $250 with Wi-Fi. So this is fun. This is a good video because I want to see what's inside here. But you probably don't want a new 3011. Not that I'm saying rip it out either. I mean, I'm probably going to use this one as a home firewall after I'm done testing things out with OpenSense, because hardware firewalls have their advantages. And although it's fun to have a firewall as a VM, there are days where hardware would just be simpler, and this is more than capable of everything I want to do at home. So I mentioned we got 10 Ethernet ports. It's got a little LCD, which I really like. That's actually part of why I'm considering putting it in. That's sadly one feature the 4011 lost to keep costs down. USB 3 port lets it do a couple of different things. You can log to there. You can use it for network storage. You can hook up a 4G LTE modem to it. So I think that's enough monologuing. Let's get inside. So this 3011's already been deployed, so its rack gears are installed, which means I need to take them off. Which we're going to need just a number 2 Phillips here. And in hindsight, I totally glossed over one of the other features that I'll flip it over and point out. And that is, there's a console port on the back here for serial console. And our reset pin. So this whole thing appears to just be held together by 3 screws. And in hindsight, I didn't actually need to remove The rack ears, I thought maybe that one of the screws went into the top case. It looks like that is not the not the case after all. All right. So this is interesting because this isn't going to be new. This will be after a few years of sitting in a switch room, and my God, there's nothing there. So at some point, there were provisions for a 3011 with an internal power supply, and that either made it to a different market or was dropped due to cost. Because I can see tabs for holding an external power supply. I can see 2 screws here. In addition, if I look on the back, there's a punch out where I could install, let's shine a light through it, see if that helps it show up any better on camera. So there's a punch out here where I could install the a socket for an AC power cord, be it 2-pin, 3-pin. Knowing them, it probably just would have been a regular IEC plug, nothing weird. And then if I look at the board, so all my JTAG headers are here. I don't know what was supposed to go in this socket. It looks big enough to be a lot of different things. There's my reset pin. Some more contact pads that I don't actually recognize. This, and here I can actually see one of the disadvantages the 3011 had over some of the other models. So there's a switch chip here, and there's a switch chip here, which meant that depending on how your network was set up, if you did something like brought the internet in on port 1 and then hung a switch off of port 10, that had to go through the CPU to go from switch chip to switch chip. They couldn't communicate directly with each other. And there's a block diagram Mikrotik has on their website. I'll see if I can grab a picture of it to show that. But that could hamper performance in certain setups. A lot of stuff went just fine at line rate through there, but there were certain things that the CPU, you'd incur a penalty, and if you did enough of that, you'd start to see a performance impact as far as your data rates were concerned. So that is interesting to see. What else have we got here? And I do, for the record, have the actual power supply it shipped with. It shipped from ULL Power, and this was a 24 volt 1.2 amp power supply. Although you could run these on a lot of different units. In fact, if you see, the back is marked for DC 10 to 28 volt. So it'll take that wide range of voltage in, and then there's some capacitors and some other voltage regulation on that part of the board to adjust it to what's actually needed for the individual components. Alright, that's what I was looking for. So there are 2 contacts here that if I had a 10 to 28 volt DC power supply, I could install it in here and solder those in. And it looks like that shares the same voltage path with the regular barrel connector. So I could plunk in a 24 volt power supply that I think Mikrotik even sells for one of their other units and use that here. Alright, so I think that's enough that we're going to learn from this side. Not seeing any real surprises. I see my memory modules, which the 3011 had 1 gig of RAM and 128 megs of NAND. So that's a hefty increase over what something like my CRS328, which is just a switch, has. It's got all of like 64 megs of RAM and 16 megs of storage. Although that too has a level 5 license. So from a software standpoint, you know, anything I can do here, I can do there. That's one of the traps, so to speak, of Mikrotik gear, is that people will underspec devices. They'll buy something like this, and they'll expect it to do all of the same routing at the same performance level, because it says it can do it on paper, that like a 1036 or a 1072 can. Now those are rated to handle like 20 and 80 gigs of data respectively, and this, you know, for VPN traffic is going to handle 50 or 100 megs, which for me at home, you know, VPN traffic's not my big issue here, is fine. Trying to get this ribbon cable released. There we go. And then with that out, hey, that's not all the way out. I'm just curious to see if there's anything hidden on the underside of the PCB. Not really. It looks like the NAND chip might be here. I have a package that looks right to be the NAND chip for 128 megs of NAND. But that's it. That's, you know, there's a couple of power regulation components, some resistors, looks like a couple of surface mounted capacitors, little ones. Little bit of regulation and conversion here for the optics, which this is 1.25 gigabit capable. It is not 10 gig capable. So this is a regular SFP slot. This is not a SFP plus module like we're used to seeing on a lot of the newer equipment. So overall, no real surprises here. This is a router board 3011. Now this was designed back in an era where Mikrotik would sell a lot of these things independently. You could go to Mikrotik and you could buy a router board and then put it in your own enclosure. They got away from that, I don't know, starting in like 2012, 2014, shortly after this would have been available. So this still shows some of the features that would be available in a design like that. And I think the leftover and optional internal power supply contacts are part of that, because we didn't see that in a lot of the others, where we did see recycled design where they used various components multiple times, but we didn't see any instances where they really had stuff that just didn't fit any of the new features. Now I'm curious. I bet that is. I know the micro SD card's too small. I bet this was an SD card slot. I bet some variant or some point in time they had an SD slot here for God knows what, and these are contacts for a mini PCIe card. And that does not surprise me. So there was prior to the 3011 a device called the 2011. And that was available in a wired version, just like the 3011, as well as a Wi-Fi model. I don't know why, but the 3011 never saw a release with a Wi-Fi chip. Clearly, since I see contacts for a mini PCIe card, they intended to when they designed it. However, due to lack of interest or replacement with other newer devices like the HAP AC, potentially just some form of software or hardware conflict that made it not beneficial to do so, they never released this as a Wi-Fi device. Although clearly I can see it says mini PCIe card. If I was to put a mini PCIe card on the board, it would line up there. I would go as far as to say that if I was to, not that I'm going to, if I was to put a socket on the board and use a reflow station to connect it, it looks like all of the traces are there. So theoretically, that would work. There's nothing in Mikrotik's software that stops me from doing something like that. Although obviously it wouldn't be supported. But they're more than happy to let you tinker with mini PCIe devices all day long. There is a limit to what they support, however. So if I wanted to try and make a wireless 3011, not that I have any intent to, I'd probably want to use a Qualcomm Atheros card. That's usually what they have in their devices that have card-based Wi-Fi, which, fun fact, the 4011 is card-based. So you can buy a 4011, which is what replaced this, and although Mikrotik doesn't have any Wi-Fi 6 cards available, if you dropped a Qualcomm Wi-Fi 6 card in, it should work. I'm not going to tell you that you'll get Wi-Fi 6 speeds or that it'll be, what's the word I want to use here? Ideal, because it has an antenna array that was designed as a Wi-Fi AC device, and just because it works, since the drivers are compatible, doesn't mean that it's going to work well. But that's kind of the flexibility Mikrotik's known for. So, overall, fun little device. Like I said, I'm gonna try it in place of my OpenSense install, and part of that is I've had some issues with my OpenSense install recently, and they have nothing to do with the OpenSense project as a whole. I have done something that is causing it to fill up log files, and I cannot for the life of me remember what I did. So the thing just needs reset, but that seems like as good a time as any to play with this 3011 that I took out of service and see how it is having a hardware firewall again for a while. Alright, there will be a link to the 3011 in the description below. It's still a good piece of hardware. I would consider the 4011 over it if you can shell out the extra money, but if you just need something basic and dumb and reliable, this thing was in service for 2 years before I took it out through no fault of its own. The client who I installed it for said, "Hey, we all need to work from home now. Can we have VPN set up?" And I walked through it and I said, here are the performance limitations of the hardware that was specified based on what you had, which this was more than happy to route line rate 500 megs a second at their relatively basic network all day and just sit there and do its thing. And they decided they wanted something with a more capable VPN processing. Yeah. And they decided they wanted a little bit more VPN capability than what I had told them the 3011 could handle, because I had a 3011 and I had tested its VPN capabilities, because I had to replace Cisco gear for my main office. And not that I had intended to use a 3011, but I needed some kind of frame of reference for what the VPN setup process was like on Mikrotik hardware, and I used my secondary site's RB3011 for that. Because it's no different on that than the 1036 units that I did deploy. Although those do handle things much better. The 1036s I put in, I can handle a VPN connection moving 500 megabytes of traffic at about 2% CPU load, and no one else on the network notices. So they're a lot more potent. But if you recall, and there'll be a link to that in the description if I remember to do it. I haven't been great about that recently. But if you do remember, if you go back and look it up and watch it, or if I remember to link it, that was a lot bigger piece of hardware. And even that was still impressive at how little there was for how much it's capable of. As always, I want to thank anyone who helps support Pocketables, be it through Patreon, be it through our Amazon affiliate links, be it simply through subscribing, or even just watching these videos. It is support like that that helps make content like this possible. I want to thank Alextrix, as always, for providing our opening and closing themes. Finally, thank you for watching.